Good afternoon and welcome, and thank you for being here today. It is my great honor to welcome you to the Campaign for College Opportunity. I know many of you are familiar with and have worked with the campaign, and we're pleased to welcome you back then to this relatively new office. I'm Thomas Saenz. I am the chair of the Campaign for College Opportunity, at least in part because the organization that I head as president and general counsel, MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, is one of the co-founders of the campaign some 14 plus years ago. And we're very proud today to conclude, I believe, a series of conversations with the potential future leaders of the state of California. We began with the gubernatorial candidates, and we are now finishing up round two conversations with the candidates for lieutenant governor. And the conversations are about the importance of higher education to California's future. I'm sure you all know how critical it is that we have a higher education system, public and private, that serves the best needs of the state and that will help us to meet a particular challenge, and that is the need for a higher proportion and significantly higher number of degree-holding adults in the state of California. Currently, just under half of adults in California have a college degree, and we need to raise that to about 60% or more with a college degree. That means over 1.5 million new degree holders in the next several years. It is a challenge, and one that the state has not faced before, but that is essential to our ability to continue to thrive as a leader, not just of the nation, but of the whole global community. Obviously critical to our endeavor is ensuring that we have a higher education system across the board that serves the full diversity of our population, including the growing and significant Latino population, which has long faced and continues to face significant gaps in education achievement, including college completion. We have to solve that problem if we are going to ensure that the state can thrive. So, welcome to a very interesting discussion that will be led by our leader, the executive director of the Campaign for College Opportunity for more than half of its existence, I believe, Michelle Siqueiros, who needs not a lot of introduction, but you all know that she is from Los Angeles. She is the first in her family to go to college and complete college. She's a graduate of Pitzer and has her master's degree from another institution, UCLA. I know she likes to emphasize that in crowds. In mixed crowds of UCLA and USC folks. So she's a proud Bruin and a graduate of Pitzer, as I mentioned. She will be leading us in this discussion. And of course, our special and honored guest is a candidate on the ballot in just a few weeks for Lieutenant Governor, Eleni Kounalakis. And Eleni Kounalakis was born and raised in Sacramento. She graduated from Dartmouth College and obtained an MBA after that at the University of California at Berkeley. She also holds a law degree from the American College of Greece. She currently lives in San Francisco with her husband, who is here, and her 2 sons. She began her career as a staff member of the California Democratic Party in Sacramento, where she helped to elect 2 women to the United States Senate, something we're still proud of having extended with another addition to that line of women representing the state. Later, she ran her family business for 18 years at AKT Development, a housing development firm delivering housing to middle-class families. In 2010, President Obama appointed her as U.S. Ambassador to Hungary, where she worked closely with the president and with Secretary Hillary Clinton. She later wrote Madam Ambassador, 3 Years of Diplomacy, Dinner Parties, and Democracy in Budapest, depicting her experiences through storytelling as a foreign policy advisor while balancing, equally important, family life. After her service as ambassador, Ms. Kounalakis continued to be an advocate for progressive change by helping run campaigns and initiatives in California. She served as board commissioner of California's First Five Commission and the California Blue Ribbon Commission on Autism. She was appointed to the San Francisco Port Commission by Mayor Ed Lee, and is the current chair of the California Advisory Council for International Trade and Investment. You certainly have from that bio a sense of her broad experience But today we're going to hear what her views are, already expressed throughout the campaign, but we'll hear them fleshed out more on higher education. With that, let me turn it over to the boss, Michelle Zuccheros.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Madam Ambassador, for joining us today in this conversation. And thank you all for coming, especially our co-host for today's conversation, which are the amazing student leaders of our colleges and universities. We have the leadership of the UC Student Association, the Cal State Student Association, as well as the Community College Student Senate, and you'll get to hear directly from them. We're really honored that you're all here. And it's always good to look out and see some familiar faces. Many of you joined us for previous conversations with gubernatorial candidates and another lieutenant governor candidate. And so we are really excited about really having a good conversation and dialogue with you about your thoughts on higher education in particular. You heard Tom talk about the importance of higher education for the future of California. As a businesswoman, as someone involved in international trade, I suspect that you know the need very well. We have been talking about the importance of setting an attainment goal for our state of 60%. And so I'd like to start with that first question for you. What is your vision for higher education, and as a leader in this role, if elected in November, Lieutenant Governor of California?
Well, Michelle, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me here. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I think one of the degrees you mentioned is honorary, actually, so just don't want to, overstate my resume. But I am a product of really what so many of us in California have experienced. I've experienced the California dream, the American dream. My story really begins with my grandmother back in Greece. People say that they're reminded of her when they meet me when I go back. But my grandmother never learned to read. She never learned to write. She did not go to school for a single day. She didn't have those opportunities. But she let my father come to the United States, came to California when he was just 15 to work in the fields as a farm worker. He made his way to Sacramento State University. He paid $62 a semester, including books, to get his education. I grew up in a rural part of Sacramento County in a very vibrant Greek immigrant community. There weren't so many role models for me in terms of looking to go to college, but there were enough. I ended up going to college. My father went, he didn't quite graduate. I was the first in my family to graduate from a four-year university. I went off to Berkeley and got my MBA. For the record, I paid $2,000 a year for my MBA. The same program today costs $62,000 a year. So, and then of course, after working in our family business, again, something else that's very common in immigrant families, I was very involved as an activist in politics. I believed in democracy. I always have, and that's been a very big part of my life. So when I was 43 years old, I had the opportunity to join the Obama administration. And from my grandmother in Greece, who never learned to read or write, to our family's story in America, I was sent back to Europe by the President of the United States when I was just 43 years old to serve as a United States ambassador. So this is kind of a dramatic example of the American dream, but people say, oh, well, you haven't forgotten where you've come from. Well, there's no time to forget. It's happened pretty quickly in my family. And so I've lived with this awareness that my story is improbable, and that critical to this story was public higher education in California, that in the 60s was established with the vision for the master plan for higher education. That moment where my father could go from the fields to the classroom changed the trajectory. It's meant everything. So in my activism during my life, all of these ways that public policy can ensure that the American dream pathway stays open have been central to my advocacy. And in this campaign, for Lieutenant Governor is I have traveled all 58 counties of California, which I have done, going to more than a dozen campuses of CSU and UC campuses. This to me is central to this job. So my real vision is that if I'm elected, I will be able to truly be a champion for the kinds of policies that ensure that we stay true to the vision that we don't know where talent is going to come from. So in California, we throw open the doors of higher education because what has come up through this system has made us a beacon for the world of equality. It has made us a strong society. And frankly, it has also made us the 5th largest economy in the world.
Right. So are you comfortable in pushing the next governor to set a goal for higher education? We have been advocating that 60% of Californians should have some post-secondary. And speaking to your experience, what job can you get today and actually support your family and pay your bills if you just have a high school diploma?
So the question is, am I comfortable pushing the next governor? I watched you, Michelle, interviewing the next governor, and he made some pretty bold statements about his vision for higher education. He was lieutenant governor for 8 years. He has served in this capacity. 8 years of sitting on the boards of the CSU and the UC. I am very optimistic that we will have in the next governor someone who recognizes a fundamental principle here, which is that when we invest in education, we are investing in education. This is proven now that, and UC Berkeley, no disrespect to UCLA, Michelle, but UC Berkeley, where I went, just released a study not too long ago that for every dollar California has invested in public higher education, we have gotten $4.50 back in increased tax revenue and a reduction in costs of services. So California taxpayers can feel confident that knowing that when we push for a greater allocation of the general fund to bring down tuition for our students, lessen the burden of tuition on our students, but also build the capacity that we need in order to ensure that we can get to that 60% goal, that this is an investment, that ultimately we are going to reap the rewards of this investment, and it will be good not just for the students who benefit, but for all Californians.
Wonderful. And I'll just take a moment to brag because it was the campaign that commissioned that study at Cal that you cited. So gotta take credit when you deserve it, so I'm gonna do that. I think we heard you share a few whys, but I'm gonna be very direct. Why do you want to run for Lieutenant Governor?
And I have to answer honestly because I'm part of what's being called the class of 2016, which are primarily women who, after the election, the shocking election results of November of 2016, stood up and said, I'm just going to run for office. It was, I'm a very process-oriented person. I plan things out. I think things through. This was driven largely by a feeling I had that anyone who thought they had something to offer should stand up and step forward. And honestly, I didn't know where it would lead. But you can't know if people might want to vote for you unless you actually, put your name on the ballot and try. And it has been an incredible experience, I will tell you that. Again, I've been in all 58 counties. I enjoy talking to people. I did this when I was an ambassador. I did this when I was in housing because it's a very stakeholder-driven process. I like talking to people and hearing their stories. And so along the way, we've developed a platform that's very closely connected to what I heard when I was out there on the road. And here we are now just a few days away from the election. And I'm so grateful for the experience as a whole. And now I'm just really hopeful because it's an opportunity, if I win, to bring all those voices that I heard on the road with me to advance the policies, the priority policies that I really heard from people across this state, of which affordable higher education is clearly one of them.
So the current lieutenant governor has said that this position should have more authority. That, obviously one of the principal and important roles is that you sit on the UC Board of Regents and the Cal State Board of Trustees, but Gavin Newsom has made the case that maybe it should be, more powerful than that. So what do you think about that?
I think it's incredibly ironic that Gavin Newsom always makes these jokes about the position, and he has been one of the most productive lieutenant governors we've ever had. So he has proven the kinds of things that you can get done in this job, not just in higher ed, but in all kinds of things, as he has shown a couple of the issues that he really is focused on, gun control and others, that he's been able to advance. So for me, I guess I see higher education not just as fundamentally part of the job, because you're elected to serve on these boards, the CSU and the UC. To me, you bring with you the authority of the electorate. And you're not just sitting on one, you're sitting on two of the three institutions of higher education with an important relationship with the community colleges, as you very well know from your research, have got to be more closely connected in terms of the pipeline into the CSU and the UC system. So for me, I see it not just higher education, not just as part of the job, but then the other piece of it, that the lieutenant governor's office is this bully pulpit, right? Because apparently you have a lot of time on your hands, right? So combining both the responsibilities of the office with the bully pulpit to be able to talk about public higher education, I really relish the opportunity to do that.
Do you think you should have a seat on the California Community College Board of Governors?
Look, I think that something like that is something I'd be interested in exploring. I think that already, because of the connection, because of the pipeline, I will have the ability to, I'm sure I would have an open door with the members of the community college board to be able to communicate, and this idea that there has to be better coordination is something I agree with. It's not something that I came up with. Right. You very well know, just in the last few years, there's really been a better understanding and recognition of the importance of a holistic approach at looking at higher ed. If you look at the state budget of California, now because of Proposition 98, 40%, actually it's about 42% of the general fund budget goes to K-14. So that includes community college. And another 12% goes to CSU and UC. So that's somewhere around 54% of the general fund budget going toward education in the state of California. That is an enormous investment by our people, by our taxpayers, that reflects our values. The idea that we don't have a single coordinating body to be able to take up issues is something that now is gaining recognition. We've got to have a better process to be able to look at not just the best way to allocate resources and efficiencies where they are, but also things like, data and how you collect the data and how you share that data. Now, having worked in the federal government, I have a very high sensitivity to privacy issues. I worked in Europe and helped negotiate something called the passenger name recognition issue, which was very, very challenging anti-terrorist agreement that we worked on together with the Europeans. There's no question that when particularly you're talking about children, we've got to protect privacy. But it's also very, very clear that we can be doing a lot more to collect the information that we need to be able to plan. And again, it's been my experience in the last year in working and sitting down with leaders in public higher education that most people know we need to do this. It's really about rolling up our sleeves and putting in the time and the effort and the energy and the focus and having the leadership to move these issues along.
Yes, and I just have to say that that's music to our ears to hear you talk about the importance of coordinating body for higher education and the importance of data and transparency around data, so that we can do what you're saying, which is at the end of the day, how can you solve a problem in higher education if you don't have the data and information in front of you to tell you what the problem might be? So we're happy to hear that. I am going to invite our first student to come up. We have Caroline Siegel-Singh. She's a student at UC San Diego, and as a new UC San Diego parent, I'm super thrilled to meet you because I'm going to show you a picture of my kid, and that way you can tell me if he's not reading enough while he's there. But Caroline is president of the UC Student Association, and she has an important question to ask you.
Hi. So California is ranked 49th in the nation in providing direct access to the state's public four-year universities for its residents. The California Master Plan for Higher Education of 1960 reserves seats at the CSU and UC systems for only the top 33% of high school students. However, today, more students are qualified to attend to CSU and UC, resulting in thousands of qualified students being turned away and an overly competitive admissions process for Californians hoping to attend the UC. If elected, would you work to revisit the admissions cap and corresponding increases in the state budgets for CSU and UC to increase access for qualified students? And how else would you work to ensure all qualified Californians have a spot in our public universities through the budget and public policy process?
Okay, I'm going to answer that in two parts. One, the capacity issue, 33% or more, and then secondly, the second part of your question, what was the last thing you said?
So how would you work to ensure qualified Californians have a spot?
Got it. Okay. So the Master Plan for Higher Education is this beautiful vision from 1960 something, right? And it's poetic when you read it, really. And when I read it, I think very specifically about the opportunity that my family has had as a result of it. There was no other way that my dad, that kid in the fields who was in remedial English in public schools, was not top of his class. He wasn't even in the standard English class because he couldn't speak English very well when he got there. Could end up getting an education. It's because of this vision. And of course also the Donahoe Act, which ensured that there was actual legislation that implemented it. It is terribly out of date. We heard at the opening that it is a projection of about 1.1 million degrees short that will be in California for the jobs that are coming at us. So what does that mean? That means we have all this talent here in California, and in particular the CSU just turned away 32,000 qualified students ready to matriculate into the CSU system, and there were no spots for them. 32,000 turned away, right? So we have this incredible talent bubbling up, more high school graduates than ever in California, steadily increasing year on year. We have this tremendous need coming at us as the 5th largest economy in the world, a growing economy that needs that trained workforce with some kind of college degree, maybe associate's degree or BA or beyond. And we have money because generally speaking, you look at our budget, we do have quite a bit of resources going into this. So we've got all the makings of success. What we need is more focus at the government level with an effort to look at the pipeline, look at the from First Five, which I sat on the board of the First Five Commission, all the way up to career. We have to look at this holistically. We need to commit more general fund monies, which I will be strongly advocating for if I'm elected, because it's going to require more money to be able to expand capacity. We need to look at efficiencies because there's a lot that we can do, including, by the way, tackling the fact that only about 1 in 5 CSU students graduate in 4 years. Just over half of UC students graduate in 4 years. Did I say 4 years? Right? And that was the idea, that this is a 4-year experience. It's not a 4-year experience. If we can figure out how to get students through faster, more efficiently, we add capacity just on the basis of having them, go through in a more streamlined process. So we can do this, but it's going to require hard choices. It's going to require a lot of hard work, and it's really going to require the resources from the general fund. And I strongly believe that this is the best way that we can invest in our future, and I'll be advocating for that. I want to also just say one more thing about community college, which is really an answer to your second part. How do you ensure that any student in California who is prepared and ready to go on to college has the opportunity to do so? There has been an awakening of recognition that the community colleges offer tremendous opportunity. There are about 750,000 students currently enrolled in the CSU and the UC together. There are 2.1 million students currently enrolled in our community colleges. And the percentage of the general fund budget that goes to community colleges, it used to be about a third. It's actually grown because of Proposition 98 for the community colleges. There is a lot of recognition now, and I hesitate to say this is what we have to do as if people aren't working on it. The last few years has really seen an increase in the recognition that this is where a great deal of the opportunity lies. What do I mean by that? If you can live at home, because we know a big part of the cost of college is living in the dorms or living off campus, if you can live at home and get a year or 2 years of your college degree, get some of your early requirements out of the way, and then transfer to the CSU or the UC system, as a student you can save a lot of money, and it can add capacity overall to the system, right? At the same time, if you look at the courses that are being offered at the community colleges, a lot of students who'd like to go down that path, the courses that are overbooked are the ones that they need to be able to do that. So we have to look at being a little more responsive to where the demand is in the students and the courses that they want to take at community colleges in order to allow them to take advantage of that kind of a process, right? We also have to look, by the way, at the fact that some of these degrees, they're associate's degrees. Some of the advanced education, post-secondary education training is job training. So I was in Stockton not too long ago, and I went to this family center that helps train, people who are looking for a job, people who are trying to get their career on track. It gives them advice and resources and assistance. And they said that the Delta College, right near where we were meeting, has a backlog for welding classes of 2 years, right? So you've got all of these, and they told me primarily men, they want to get this training, and they're waiting in line for up to 2 years to be able to take these courses. So I think it's very, very important, and Jerry Brown has already started this process of looking at how to allocate resources to the community colleges to ensure that we're really looking at the big picture, right, of that pipeline, but also looking at the kinds of jobs that people want to go to community college to get the training for. I've answered like 5 questions in this one, I know, but I'm excited about it. I guess that's why I'm really, I see the opportunity to be able to do exactly what you're suggesting, which is add capacity so more California kids will have the opportunity to go to college here in California.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline. I'll show you a picture of Aiden later. So I want to piggyback on that because I think what we want to convey to you, should you be elected Lieutenant Governor, is that we really do need to grow the number of students that get directly into the UC and the CSU, especially when they're ready. We've made a promise that if you do A, B, and C, or A through G in California, that you get a shot at going straight to a four-year university. And we know that your chance of graduating with a four-year degree is much higher when you start at a four-year university.
That's true.
So we need to send more students, and that's especially true for students of color. It's also true what you said, which is the importance of community colleges to ensure and provide an associate degree, a certificate, or to transfer. And so we've been very much involved in advocating for transfer reform so that students know exactly what they need to do to earn an associate's degree and be eligible to transfer, and that when they transfer, the four-year doesn't get to say, oh, well, you know what, you should take these two other classes.
Right.
No, you've taken the first 2 years, we're going to get you out in two, speaking to your point of time to degree. We've also been very active on remedial education reform and really pushing to ensure that we use high school GPA instead of placement tests that we know don't work. And we've been very supportive of the governor's student success funding formula, which is more money for community colleges, especially if you serve low-income students, and more money if you ensure that they complete. How do you feel about those community college reforms, and will you champion them in your position?
So I agree. And this is really, what we've been talking about all morning. I think part of the way I look at it, though, isn't just policy by policy, it's process. How are we going to engage from, looking at what's going on with our kids before they even get to college, all the way up to not just graduating from college, but the kind of retraining that is necessary. How do we look at this with educators, with student advocates, with policy experts, and with elected officials, with government officials, to make sure that we're all looking at the same problem from the same angle and looking at the same data to be able to begin to change the policies that will affect these things. Because, I worked in the federal government for almost 4 years. I was a United States ambassador. I ran an embassy of almost 400 people. Very often, the way that you approach these things, you have to start by asking yourself, what process are you going to go through? And the way that I see it right now, the process is quite disjointed. And we've got to be able to draw the lens back. And again, because I listened to your interview 2 times with Gavin Newsom when he was here not too long ago, I think that what we're looking at is a governor who truly wants to re-up the master plan, to really take this holistic view. I think that's an important part of it. But then beyond that, specifically, there are already reforms that are going on in how funds will be allocated to community colleges. And I think it's really important to look at what the students, the kinds of classes the students want to take. Now, I say that as an English major and a classics minor, because we know that very often the students are looking for the courses that will help them get a job, and very often it may be something like welding or computer science, and very often the kind of courses they need are really critical thinking. And critical thinking can come in a whole variety of ways. So it's not sort of turn the whole system into career and technical education. Again, I am a product of the liberal arts, and I believe that that is an important part of being able to tackle any kind of job. But again, it's really, I'm looking for a change in process, for being able to look at the challenges, find the efficiencies, and be able to take the kinds of hard decisions that will ensure that it gets back to the very essence of the last student's question, which is how are we going to accommodate more students?
Yeah, excellent. So I'd like to invite our second student leader. Marcos Montes is a recent graduate of Cal State LA, former vice president at the Cal State Student Association.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I want to talk a little bit about higher education finance. So California currently funds a system of higher ed on an annual basis in response to budget requests from the institutions themselves, which leaves very few options for long-term planning. What do you think are the strengths and shortcomings of the current higher education funding model? And what are your thoughts on transitioning to a multi-year funding model that could provide families and higher ed institutions with more stability?
So I think that's certainly something, a multi-year planning approach and budgeting approach is something that I'm certainly open to. The reality is that budget battles are battles of values and priorities, and I do intend, if I am elected to this position, to be that person in Sacramento that when they see me coming, they know what I'm there to fight for, number one. Number two, I think we have to talk about facilities. As part of the workouts during the recession, the bond financing for facilities on UC campuses was transitioned over to the books of the UC and away from the state budget books. It allowed for refinancing and huge savings, but now the campuses are dealing with these debt services that they have to find the money for every year. I think we need to look at how we fund our facilities differently. And one of the things that I hope to explore is whether there's an appetite in the state among voters for a facilities bond. I have spent a lot of time on our campuses for UC and CSU. It is not adequate what we are building, and certainly the deferred maintenance is really unacceptable and maybe even dangerous in some circumstances. Not to mention, of course, the class sizes, which are out of control. So I very much hope to work on this. I have a master's in business and a very sharp pencil from UC Berkeley. So these are some of the things I want to focus on.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marcos. I'd like to invite Valerie Johnson to come up and share her question with you. She's the president of the Student Senate at Crafton Hills College. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I have a question about affordability. So affordability changes continue to loom large for college students. However, the challenges tend to be more complex than just tuition and fees. There's a lot more going on there. And in the Cal State system specifically, for instance, only 60% of students have their tuition fully covered. And yet they continue to have affordability challenges. So this is demonstrated by the fact that students who receive Cal Grants graduate with nearly the exact same amount of debt as students who do not receive Cal Grants. Furthermore, nearly 11% of Cal State students are homeless. And when evaluating a student's total cost of attendance, housing, not including tuition, makes up a student's largest cost. So the biggest cost is housing. And given these facts, if you had $100 million to address system-wide affordability challenges that students face, how would you direct it to be spent in the short term? And piggybacking off of that, what is your long-term solution for securing sustainable funding to meet the academic and basic needs of students?
Housing. I spent 18 years in housing. And I really look forward to the opportunity to working on this very specific issue if I'm on the board of the CSU and the UC. I was shocked. It was last summer 2017, I just announced my candidacy. My friend Elmi Bermejo, me, and our Chevy Volt started crisscrossing the state to visit all the counties, looking for people basically to talk to. And we visited several of the campuses, and we were up at Humboldt State and Chico within a couple of days of each other. And they were showing us some of the dorms. And I asked, well, what does it cost to live in a dorm here in Chico? And she said, well, it's with or without a meal plan. Without a meal plan. She said, $800 a month. Hey, $800 a month for a bunk in a dorm room? How could that possibly be? Well, then it went on, and we went to UC Merced. Costs $1,800 a month to live in the dorms? What is going on? How could it possibly cost so much? And so because I was fortunate enough, as we called and asked for meetings, that there was open doors and people were in the administration were willing to talk to us. And I said, well, how do you come up with what you charge the students for the dorms? Do you figure out how much it costs you to deliver that bunk bed? Well, basically we look at what the market in the area is charging, and that's what we charge. And then in many of the campuses, it's a requirement or strongly suggested that freshmen live in the dorms. I try not to be too harsh about it, because I think that after the recession, what happened was universities facing massive cuts from the general fund had to figure out how they were going to, bridge all the gaps. But, I hate to say it, the weakest link in the equation were the kids. And this is just wrong. The fact that when we came out of the recession, we haven't corrected for it adequately. We didn't make up for all of those costs that were put on to the backs of students in tuition increases, but also in increased housing costs. That's just not right. So I do intend to get into it. One of the things is data, because I've been trying to figure out more about this, and it's been hard to get the data. When you have transparency, when you ask these questions, and I am a seasoned question asker, again, product of UC Berkeley, and so we have to get to the bottom of this. But what I will tell you that I think we are likely to find is that this is yet another problem that has been caused by a lack of adequately funding CSUs and UCs out of the general fund, and we've got to do that. So, if
Valerie
we had
also gave you $100 million
to spend,
yes.
look, I would leverage it. I would leverage it to build more housing on college campuses. Is what I would do. For that $100 million in seed money, you get partnerships. You get, you can borrow with that as part of the principal, and get in there and build more housing on college campuses. But you don't do it with a requirement that the way that you pay back the debt service is by charging students $1,800 a bed in order to live in it. Other areas of efficiency for how we can do it better is by working with the state to ensure that when campuses are processing applications to be able to build more, we can do it in a more streamlined approach. And again, that's something I know a lot about and can result in a lot of savings.
Wonderful. So I'd like to invite Alejandro Lomelli to join us and ask a question. He's a former student at Long Beach City College, current student at Cal State Long Beach. And just so you know how important he thinks this conversation is, he has a midterm in a few hours.
Oh my goodness. That's
Here
called
he is.
procrastination.
Yes, we are procrastination experts, so thank you for that. As Michelle mentioned, I am a transfer student. I spent 4 long years at community colleges, and statistically that still means I beat the odds, right? So today, only 40% of California community college students earn a degree, certificate, or transfer not 2, not 4, but after 6 years. Many students face barriers that are sometimes put in place by institutions themselves. A broken remedial education system, a confusing transfer maze, a lack of structured major pathways, and limited student supports are all responsible for low completion rates. And you answered some of these questions before, but if you could elaborate a little bit more. If elected, what priorities do you have for improving pathways to community college? And how do you plan to support colleges to improve their own pathways?
Thank you very much for asking the question, and also congratulations to you for beating the odds. for learning the art of procrastination. No, but seriously, for coming here, because it requires, to get real change, requires a campaign. That is the name of this organization, Campaign for College Opportunity. When I was a kid, I came home from school one day, and my assignment was to ask one of my parents who their hero was. And I asked my father, and he said, "Oh, that's easy. It was Cesar Chavez." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, because we were out working in the fields one day, and everyone was really excited about something." And I said, "What are they talking about?" He says, "So I go to find out, and they're saying, well, there's this guy, Cesar Chavez, and he's going to get us better conditions out here in the fields." There was nowhere for them to go to the restroom, wash their hands. And he heard this, and in his mind, having grown up in war-torn Greece, where people like him and his family had no say, never in their recorded history did they have a say in how they would be governed. So he heard this and he thought, there's no way. These people are dreaming. There's no way this guy is going to be able to get the farmers to build us facilities. Why would they do that? He said, and when it happened, when Cesar Chavez was successful, and by the way, Dolores Huerta, when they were successful, he understood how America works. It works that if you have a good idea, this is how he put it, if you have a good idea and you get some people to go along with you, right? You organize around that idea. You form a campaign around that idea. Then you get in there and you can change anything. And so for you to be here today, part of a campaign, so that others who follow behind you are able to get through the process faster, more efficiently with the classes that you want to take, doing it in a way that you're not choosing between, helping your family out by getting a job or by going to school in order to be able to realize your own dreams. That's what this is all about. And we need more organizing around this issue, because you're in the middle of an experience that you see on the ground. You probably could come up with a list right now of 20 things that could be done better and more efficiently with taxpayer dollars to make the whole system work better. Am I right?
About 20.
All right. About 20. Right? And yet, who's listening to you? Who's gathering that information? How are we making sure that that information is getting to the decision makers? That is the process. And what I have seen so far is that we need more people in elected office. In fact, a person with a bully pulpit and time on her hands to be able to get into this, because it is truly the future. Guys like you, gals like you, who are working hard to be able to get through this process, this is what our future is all about. And it's why California is so important in the country. Because if we can fix these things here, if we can ensure that the 5th largest economy in the world is working up and down the ladder of socioeconomic parts of our community, and right now it's not very well, if we can make it work, what we can show, and this is my ambassador hat, what we can do is we can show that democracy delivers. Democracy delivers for people. It works. So since I answered some of the specific questions, I thought I would just kind of give you a little bit of my views on this, because the answers are there. It's a matter of working together and making sure that the process is operating in a way that the reforms that we need, that are accessible, the low-hanging fruit of reforms, are actually heard and implemented.
I think what I like that I heard you say is the importance of student voice. Oftentimes you have faculty voice, which is important to have at the table, and college leaders who run institutions, their voice at the table, but too few student voices at the table. So we hope that you walk away knowing that you have a kitchen cabinet here of amazing student leaders that should be informing your bully pulpit.
Yes.
With that, I'd like to invite a fellow Bruin to come up. Jamie Kernick, she's the Executive Vice President of UCLA's Student Association.
How do you envision your position as Lieutenant Governor to empower and support undocumented students from throughout the state to be successful within and also graduate from California's institutions of higher education like the CC, the CSU, and UC?
So I have a little bit of a different perspective on this question than you may have heard. I was a United States ambassador for 4 years, almost 4 years. I ran an embassy in a former Soviet satellite country. I was in Budapest, Hungary, and we had a consulate. So for the years that I served in this position, every day we went through the process of issuing visas and, dealing with my immigration, both resident visas and non-resident visas, immigration visas, non-immigration visas. And what is interesting, if you look at the kind of process that went on in Europe after the Second World War, and you look at the kind of process that went on the southern border, particularly the border with California, it's a very different process. There was a pretty significant chunk of time where if you were in Europe and you wanted to come to California, you would wait for hours in a line that circled around the embassy. If you were south of the border in California and wanted to come over the border, there were whole long periods of time where your process was this: a wave through. We have to recognize the historical fact of how it is that California has such a high percentage of undocumented Californians here. They are here because we wanted them here. We wanted to have people coming over, working and helping to drive the economy. Now, when I go to that and when I talk about that, it creates a very different starting point to talk about this. Because I'm sure everyone in this room, and certainly my husband and I and our family, we have friends who have lived here for as long as they can remember and who are undocumented. And the idea that we have not been able to come up with a rational, sensible policy process to make this right with a pathway to citizenship is a blemish on our country. The fact that this has been taken to a whole new level by Donald Trump, using this issue to divide people, to pit people against each other, to drive us to the most base core of what he can pull from people, which is xenophobia and hatred, it's just it's terrible. So California, recognizing, truly important to know this, that legally immigration is the purview of the federal government. State law does not drive immigration, it is federal law. But in these current circumstances where, it was unthinkable 4 years ago. It was unthinkable when students signed up for DACA that the government could possibly use them coming forward and signing up to create a list to come after them. This is unthinkable, and yet here we are. So California has taken some pretty significant steps. Certainly the sanctuary state law, sanctuary cities, and as well, there has been a lot of good work done by the UC and the CSU in order to ensure that we are protecting DACA students and protecting undocumented Californians and students who are on our campuses and their families. I'm a former U.S. ambassador. I understand how this works, and I'm committed that if I have an even greater opportunity to protect undocumented Californians, that is exactly what I'll do.
Thank you for that. We have 3 more students that I want to queue up because I want to make sure in this hour with you that we get through
Okay.
all of their questions. So Adam Capps from Victor Valley Community College, he's the Vice President of the Student Senate for the California Community College system.
Earlier this year, the Campaign for College Opportunity released Left Out, a report assessing the lack of racial and gender diversity on California's college campuses. The report found that campus leadership is overwhelmingly white and male, despite 69% of college students being students of color and a majority being women. When students of color, in particular, attend our public colleges and universities, they often feel isolated. They see few other students who look like them, and even fewer faculty and staff who look like them. We know from research that students of color have improved rates of success when faculty and college leadership is racially diverse. As a voting member on the UC Board of Regents and the CSU Board of Trustees, how will you ensure California's college and university leadership reflect the racial and gender diversity of our college-age population? Will you be a leader on racial and gender equity in the state's public colleges and universities to ensure diverse faculty, academic senates, and college leaders are more representative of the students they serve? If so, what is your plan for doing so?
So thank you so much. You mentioned, Michelle, my husband, Marcos Kounalakis, is here. Marcos is a fellow at Stanford. He was part of the EOP program, the Educational Opportunity Program, because when he first started out in school, he didn't speak English. His parents were refugees from Greece. His father was a truck driver, and his mother worked the night shift in Bank of America doing punch cards. And he caught the notice of people in his community, and he was put forward by a state senator to go participate, to be part of the EOP program at UC Berkeley. He could not possibly have gone to a university like Berkeley if it hadn't been for that program. And it was especially designed to find kids like him and give them that boost. So I can start by saying, from my father's experience, from my husband's experience, I know that talent comes from anywhere given a chance. And I also know that, again, it's been highlighted now, it's very much part of the conversation, that we do not have student bodies, particularly when you look at Berkeley and UCLA, right? It's less of an issue on some of the others, and I mean, my goodness, I was at UC Merced. It's remarkable, the diversity. I think 72% of students at UC Merced are the first in their family to go to college. You know, so there are some bright spots, but we simply have to do more. And part of the challenge in all of this, of course, is that it's very hard to have there is bias and values that have to go into the process, you know, and how you determine what is fair in the process, it's definitely the subject for debate. So I campaigned, I mentioned that I was an activist. I've been an activist for campaigns and causes since I was in high school. And one of the campaigns that I advocated, one of the initiatives that I campaigned against was Proposition 209. Because it was clear that the number of African American students was going to be significantly impacted if it passed. And you had all these people saying, no, 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 it's going to make it more fair. It's going to make it more fair. Well, what happened all these years later? It took a nosedive almost immediately after. The number of African American students who were admitted and matriculated to UC systems took a nosedive. I heard a statistic, Dallas Fowler here told me, I didn't fact check it, Dallas, but I trust you, that there are more African American students in community colleges in Los Angeles,
In the Los Angeles Community College.
in the Los Angeles Community College District, than in the entire UC system combined.
That is true.
That is true. Okay.
Fact checked by every
Yes.
expert here. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Dallas Fowler, by the way, is our Southern California director, and she is full of useful information on all kinds of things. So that's what happened. But now it's law. That, by the way, Prop 209 did away with the EOP program, the program my husband went to college on. What do we do? Well, it
So would you
starts with
support a
commitment.
repeal of
I
Prop
would.
209?
I would support a repeal. But I also think that even with it in place, there are value judgments when the admissions teams at universities are figuring out who they're going to let in. There are all kinds of ways to look at getting more diversity. But again, I think that we are at just the beginning. And by the way, there is a looming decision at Harvard over the way that they have basically made it harder for students who are Asian Americans to get accepted. So we've got a real challenge on our hands. But it requires transparency in the admissions process. It requires ensuring that qualified students of color, in my opinion, there needs to be a way to identify qualified students of color without running into the law, or we have to change the law. And by the way, there are two ways to look at this. You can look at it as fairness and human rights, and we should. And this issue meets the test of fairness and human rights. But it also is important when we're looking at the long-term stability of our society. Because what I see when I look around California is this beautiful combination of people who have come from around the world who are able to prove that it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what you look like, it doesn't matter what gender you are, it doesn't matter if you're LGBTQ, it doesn't matter, any of these things. What matters is the values and the principles that you bring to your community. And higher education is an incredibly important part of that process, ensuring that there's access to it. So I don't come to you right now with the answers on this. I do come to it with a very heightened sense of awareness of how important it is that it's addressed. And I do intend to work on this very with a great deal of focus.
Well, one of the other things I wanted to ask you, so I think we're saving the real tough questions for the end, is, California's undergraduates and California as a state is incredibly diverse. 69% of our undergraduates are students of color, especially Latinx, African American, Asian American. And, he shared some of the statistics around leadership, but would you be willing to push for articulating some goals around increasing the college preparation and success for specifically Latino students, for specifically African American students, for specific Asian American students?
Look, one bright spot, as I mentioned before, is that graduation rates are increasing across the board. And again, data is so critical. I went to fact check again something that that I understood was the case, which is that for the last 7 years, high school graduation rates have increased year on year. And the first thing that came up in the Google search was challenging that fact, right? How can this be so hard to get the facts? So it's really important that we increase transparency around this issue and we get our facts clear. But assuming that generally speaking we are seeing an increase, and assuming that the data that I've seen is correct, which is that in particular graduation readiness, graduation rates and college readiness have increased, in particular among Latinos and African Americans, we've got to jump on that, right? And now that's going into the purview largely of K-12. And another bright spot is that because of Proposition 98, We do have more funds going into K-12 education. It is still not enough. We are ranked at the bottom in per pupil spending in the United States, but as of a few years ago, it was something around $8,500 in per pupil spending in California, with a national average of $12,500. Now in the last few years, since Proposition 98, it's gone up. Again, you cannot find numbers that everybody agrees on, but it looks like it's closer to about $10,500 in per pupil spending. So that is a good thing, right? Growing resources is a good thing. We definitely need to grow them more. But in focusing on these very particular things, we should be able to increase the number of students who make it into college. And as I said before, I'm committed to it.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to invite Alexa and Aisha, if you will both come up to ask your questions. Alexa is a community college student at East LA, and also served as a trustee, a student trustee for the LA Community College District. Aisha Youngblood is a Moreno Valley College student. She's currently the president of the Student Senate for the California Community College System. So happy to have you both. Alexa, if you'll ask your question first, and then before you answer, we're going to invite Aisha to ask her question.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, I have a really important question for you, and it's about you essentially, but it's about your legacy. So my question to you is, how do you plan to be an effective member of the UC Board of Regents and the CSU Board of Trustees? And how will you ensure that both boards are collaborative with community college system? And what can university stakeholders expect from your leadership? And essentially, overall, what is the legacy you want to leave behind if you are elected into office?
Why don't I answer it in 30 seconds before the next question?
Okay.
Because I know what that legacy would be if I'm elected. Nobody will ever ask again what the lieutenant governor does, because everyone will know that the lieutenant governor works on public higher education for the state of California. That is the answer.
I think that was less than 30 seconds.
So as you know, California is about to elect the new governor. How will you work with the new governor to ensure higher education remains a priority? What is your strategy for working with the next governor? And does your strategy change if it's Cox or Newsom?
So, look, I have been looking at data around the election. It looks pretty clear to me that Gavin Newsom is extremely likely to be elected in 2 weeks, 6 days, and about, 6 hours? I've known him for a long time, and we have, I voted for him many times in San Francisco. As I said, I watched his interview here not too long ago. If you didn't see it, go back and look at it. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, he's very serious about his pledges, and it makes me feel very confident that I can be serious about mine without feeling that it's going to come into any conflict. It was really quite beautiful how he talked about his 8 years as lieutenant governor, sitting on these boards, advocating for these things, because he said, wouldn't that be just awful if after all these years of talking about these things, as governor, when I have a chance to do something about it, that I didn't, you know? So you've got him on tape.
And now we have you on tape.
That's right. And I believe him. And so I am very hopeful. You know, one of the things that I always say out on the campaign trail is that if I win, nobody hands me a magic wand. There are no magic wands in this. But I believe in us. I believe in Americans. I believe in immigrants and immigrant kids. I believe in a vision for higher education, but I also believe that we have got to keep the pathway into the middle class open for families, even if they don't get into the system of higher education. That is the vision of California that I've grown up with, because it's the one that I experienced. You know, my husband's dad, as I said, we just lost him a few months ago. He was 92 years old. He finished school when he was 14 because the war broke out in Greece, and he fought in the resistance in the underground against the Nazis on the island of Crete. He was in a lineup where they were going to kill all the men and boys in this lineup, and they didn't do it. And he never had a bad day after that. Every day was a gift, and he was an incredibly important piece of our family unit. He worked so hard in his life. He drove his truck, and that job allowed him to put a roof over his family's head, food on the table, send 2 kids to good public schools, to great public higher universities in California, and they went off to do all kinds of things as well. So we have strayed from this dream. It is too hard for too many families. I have been in 58 counties. I have seen this. I know this. But I really am committed to being part of this effort, these campaigns that work to rebuild that dream and keep our state strong.
Well, I suspect Marcos and you made him very proud. I also saw, as I was reading your bio, that your father worked in the California governor's mansion as a waiter.
Right.
Was one of his jobs. And I'm wondering, is it your hope in the future to occupy that mansion?
Look, it is almost unbelievable that that kid who was a waiter would have a daughter who would run for lieutenant governor. It fills me with awe and pride, and we are just under 3 weeks away from an election, and I am very, very focused on this. And if I have the opportunity to serve and to work on these issues we've been talking about, it will be such an honor and such a privilege to do that, that it's not, I can't think beyond that. And I never have really thought beyond whatever it is that I'm doing, because you just never know what's going to happen in your life.
Eleni, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who's here. I hope you enjoyed this Cal Bruin conversation. I did. And just so you all know how much I love this job, my favorite team is playing just down the street. And the only thing keeping me from figuring out how we're doing is Chris Nellum. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here this afternoon. Again, my name's Chris Nellum. I have the privilege of serving the Education Trust West as our Senior Director of Higher Ed. If you're not familiar with ETW, we're a civil rights and educational equity research and advocacy organization. And we wake up every morning committed to closing the very opportunity and attainment gaps that you spoke about this afternoon. And so I'm excited to be here. I think not only because the conversation you and Michelle had was so pointed around the issues that we all know are so important, but because as I shared last time, for those of you who were here, have to hear this story again. I'm happy to be here because I grew up in the Imperial Valley. So hopefully one of those 58 counties you visited. And folks from the Valley don't have opportunities to be in rooms like this one today very often. You know, we're a county that is very much defined by poverty. You look around and everyone sees poverty most places you look. There are 5 or 6 prisons where I grew up. We know we share our experience of poverty with the border, and so immigration and immigration status is something that we sort of grew up knowing. The other thing, though, that I also know about the Valley is that there's no shortage of hard work. People there know the value, not only the value of hard work, but we know how to work hard. You know, I spent some time growing up in fields with folks who spend their lives putting food on the tables that we all eat off of. And so there's no shortage of hard work. But what we do lack there is real opportunity. I think there's the perceived notion that that opportunity is finite and limited. And I think in some ways that's real. And so I'm really excited to hear about the things that you all discussed tonight, because higher education is going to make a difference. It's made a difference in my life. We know that it can make a difference in others' lives, particularly for folks from the Valley. So Really excited to hear about your commitment to investing in more in higher ed. Of course, I'm happy to hear about your commitment to a coordinating body and setting an attainment goal and using data to make good decisions about higher ed. And I was really moved and appreciated your comments a few weeks ago about what motivates you personally to be committed to these issues. And so thank you for that. And I think as we close this out, I think what I hope we all get from today is that there's a real need to think boldly and to be bold as we move forward from today. Also, I think there's a value in a conversation that is authentically framed around equity. We need to have that. We need to have that conversation in California more often. And one of the things that I think really moves me or keeps me up at night is this question that why can't California have the best and most equitable higher education system in the world? We are the 5th largest economy in the world, Silicon Valley. We have the best public and private universities in the world. Why can't they be the most equitable? And so I'm really excited about the things you shared with us tonight. And I hope that we all move forward and ask that question in every room that we find ourselves in. It's one that we must answer. We must find our way. And so I'm thankful for this conversation. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Of course, thank you to the fantastic, brilliant student leaders in the room. Thank you to Michelle, and thank you to the campaign for this series of conversations that we've had this year. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And just to end, I know that several of you had questions. We ran out of time, but hopefully, Eleni, you can stay for a few minutes and you can ask her some questions. Thank you all, especially to our co-host and partners, a long list of amazing leaders and organizations across our state that co-hosted this event with us. So thank you again for coming, and enjoy Portos in the lobby area.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks so much.